people, they're going to have a choice. Do they want a leader that's going to protect jobs, protect the people's livelihoods, protect businesses, protect communities?
And what I'm hearing from them is that they are tired, sick and tired of paying more for less, of seeing the cost of everything go up.
Our plan will be to guarantee that everyone has a family doctor within 4 years. You know, Doug Ford said he'd end hallway medicine. He didn't get it done.
The premier is abandoning his job as premier at a critical moment to protect Canadian workers, Canadian jobs, and Canadian companies.
Doug Ford is launching Ontario into a snap election more than a year ahead of the province's next fixed election date. The Progressive Conservative leader's reason? He wants a mandate to face Trump's tariff threats. His rivals in the race say he'll be punished for pushing an election. Who's right? Let's bring back the front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Rob, I'll start with you. I was looking at these new numbers today that show just how far the premier's numbers in some cases have gone up over the past month because of this Trump threat and the response to it. Do you think he'll have success with that issue on the campaign trail? And what do you make of the opposition's message that he'll be punished for calling an election so early?
I mean, he's hoping, Vassy, that the Captain Canada, Canada's not for sale cap wearing shtick works. He'll be launching his campaign tomorrow in Windsor, Ontario, against the backdrop of the Detroit skyline to sort of send a message that that's what he wants this election to be about. Now, he's not wrong that the tariff threat that could be as soon as this Saturday is imminent and frightening and worrying for the economy. The problem is he's been looking for a reason to have an election since last May, long before Donald Trump was thought to be the next president, let alone the president, let alone bringing forward these unilateral 25% tariffs that he had never been mentioned before. So I think Ford was looking for an excuse to have an election for lots of reasons, not least of which is he wants to get out in front of the Greenbelt RCMP investigation. But it's also the getting is good for him. We have an Abacus data poll in the Star today. He's at 47%. The Liberals are at 24%, the NDP at 19%, and the Greens at 7%. Now, that same poll, Vash, he said that 48% of people are unhappy at having a snap election, which is a year and 3 months and 1 week early, by the way, than it needs to be. And it's going to cost $175 million. But the Tories say, we'd still pay that much for an election if we held it in June 2026 when it was supposed to be held. So I don't know if the cost bites Mr. Ford on the behind, then it could be problematic for him. But so far, Trump is taking up all the oxygen, it seems.
Yeah, Brian, do you think that, both his rivals in Bonnie Crombie and Mart Stiles have argued that, voters will be unhappy with the idea that money is being spent at this time on an election. They'll essentially punish him for calling one so in advance of the fixed election date. Do you think there is that risk, or does Trump, take up all the oxygen, I guess, depending on what happens?
There's a risk. There's always a risk when you get into an election campaign. You never know what issue is going to sort of grab attention and just start to really gain momentum. That said, if you look to Nova Scotia, we had Premier Houston call an early election in my neighboring province here, so in the neighboring province of Nova Scotia, and the Liberal Party there spent a lot of time and energy trying to make the case of how he didn't follow the act that he brought in on when the election had to be held, and it really didn't get them anywhere. And in fact, Houston won a larger majority, which was really bucking the trend of elections that were happening over the last little while. Also, I think in the case of Doug Ford, as Rob points out, he's riding high for a lot of reasons. So from that point of view, I think they're calculating. If there are some people that are a little irritated, hopefully that is overshadowed quite a bit by all the other factors that would be sort of pointing in our favor. And look, on the idea of the cost of an election, as Rob pointed out, you have to pay that at one point anyways. You pay it a little bit earlier, sure. I don't know if that resonates as much. I think Canadians realize we have a strong democracy that requires an investment to have fair elections, and I think everybody's okay with that. But they can certainly be a little irritated and see it as opportunist. But in this case, I'm not sure it will stick.
Lisa, do you think that we can be sure the ballot box question will be Donald Trump? And I ask because certainly that's the message from Doug Ford as he hits the campaign trail. I just interviewed Bonnie Crombie. who went to great lengths to try and say, like, here are all the other things that people are talking to me about and that we think will be top of mind when they actually cast a ballot, like healthcare, for example, like affordability, traditional provincial election issues. What do you think of the push and pull between those two?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so far, it's definitely going to be about Mr. Trump, and it's definitely going to be about what Ontario's reaction is going to be to a potential tariff, which we'll know about on Saturday, I guess, this week. The reality is, though, that you can't control what else happens during an election. Things can pop up. Things can be problematic. I do think that Doug Ford has a good narrative going in to this election as to why he's having it now, and that he can actually push through these couple of days of why are you holding it so early? And quite frankly, the door was opened for him when Prime Minister Trudeau prorogued. So the minute that he said that it's okay to have some kind of cessation of the Legislative Assembly during this period of time of potential tariffs, then Doug Ford just drove right through that door and was able to find the reason for him to be able to go, coupled with the notion that you want to have a mandate that matches up as closely as possible with the President Trump mandate, 4 years for 4 years.
What's your best advice, Tom, to the opposition? I was interested when I put to Bonnie Crombie, like, what would you do in response to Trump tariff differently than Doug Ford? She said, I don't want to, fight this campaign on Trump. I'm paraphrasing, but on the issue of Trump or Doug Ford's, talk of Donald Trump. Here are the other things I'm going to talk about. Like, do they need to have an answer that differentiates them from Ford on the Trump question, or will it be enough to push other issues?
Going to be very difficult to push other issues. I think that Lisa's right on one key point. Don't know where things are going to be in 4 weeks. Something could change very radically with regard to Trump. To Rob's point, with regard to the Greenbelt, you can just imagine how it would play out if we did get an RCMP report very rapidly. I mean, nothing's impossible in politics, and things can happen very quickly. But as things stand now, Doug Ford has been so strong and front and center. Indeed, he's been a national leader in the debate, and if not the fight against Trump. And I think that it's played very well for him. He's been here in Quebec, where we don't talk a lot about the provincial premier of Ontario. The guy's really, been the subject of a lot of very positive discussion. Both Marat Stiles and Bonnie Crombie, very strong politicians, good caucuses, but I can't see how they're going to punch through on any other issue except the threat of tariffs. Again, unless something very radical happens in the next 4 weeks that changes it completely. I think that Ford's being strategic, he's being opportunistic, and I don't see how it's going to come out any different than with another Conservative majority.
Do you anticipate, Benzie, that they'll start talking more about how they would respond to Trump, or keep pushing, a move away from that question?
No, I wouldn't if I were them. I would talk about 2.5 million Ontarians not having a doctor. I would talk about affordability issues. I think, to Tom's point, Ford has been very strong nationally on the Trump tariff threat. But the one wild card is what happens if come Saturday it all fizzles and there is no Trump tariff, and Trump says, "Oh yeah, we're going to go away and study the issue for a year."
Let's hope that's our problem we have to deal with.
Yeah, but I mean, and Ford's guys are ready for that. They say, and they will say, yeah, but there's still the potential down the road. Now, the president of the United States does not care who the leader of any subnational jurisdiction is. So this idea that Doug Ford is going to be negotiating with Donald Trump is preposterous. But it's a good frame for Mr. Ford. But if I were Marat Stiles or Bonnie Crombie or Mike Schreiner, I would be saying, no, let's talk about the issues that you haven't kept your eye on. Healthcare, education, the state of transit. There are 81,000 homeless people that live in Ontario, Vassy, and there are homeless encampments in every major city and in some small towns. That's not a good look for any premier, any incumbent government.
Okay, I got to leave it there. There'll be lots to talk about next week after Saturday. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the discussion. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie, our front bench.